some education issues that are really important tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
Welcome in. On Friday evenings, we tend to spread it out a little bit. We've had an interesting week here locally with the abortion battle on Smith Hill, and we'll regroup on that on Monday, because if you're a regular viewer of the show, you know, and if you're not, now you do. We record our Friday shows on Thursday afternoon and take Friday off from a production place, and so it's hard to comment on real time on Friday. I'm guessing as I record this on Thursday afternoon that we probably passed the House version of the codification law for Roe v. Wade, but there's probably more to come on that, no doubt. By the way, on Monday's show, Charlie Lombardi, who hasn't seen us for a while, North Providence Mayor, will wax on about many issues, I'm sure. He's our guest scheduled. In the meantime, Erika Sanzi is my guest. She is somebody I go to for education matters. She's had an interesting, experience on the internet lately with her blogging and response to some of her writings. And I also want to check in with her on some thoughts that have been articulated this week, including, but not limited to, this headline and conversation that I had last night with a professor from Brown who heads up the National Organization for Women. Pre-K is the issue, and Hillary testified at the Senate this week.
Rhode Island needs women at all levels of its workforce, and accomplishing this goal requires robust systems change, like high-quality universal pre-K opportunities. Investment in preschool and pre-kindergarten delivers long-term economic benefits when it comes to our children as well. So we've studies that have already been cited, but just to recap here, pre-K reduces the need for special education services. It helps improve high school graduation rates. It means higher career earnings and less criminal activity in adulthood.
Levy-Friedman is the president of the National Organization for Women, and a terrific thinker. She and I don't agree on everything, but she's a great guest. And I challenged her last night, Erika, with this concept that, you know, I get the earlier you get the kids going, the better probably, and maybe they become better students K1, 2, 3, and they're off and running, but we're shoveling them into a system that's broken, and why don't we fix the system first? Is that an irresponsible thing to say on my part?
No, I think it's a fair question. I mean, I'm not going to be the person who says my child deserves to be in pre-K because he was born into a family that can pay for it and somebody else's child doesn't. So on that, I certainly agree with Hillary. I would certainly raise questions about quality. I mean, what we sometimes do is we check these boxes and we put funding in, but we don't necessarily see the outcomes that we want. And I would also say that there are alternative ways for parents to access pre-K. I would point to the Office of Children, Youth and Learning, and where I live in Cumberland, which my kids actually attended as a supplement to their half-day kindergarten program, my oldest. So there you have low-cost pre-K content that offers a sliding scale in terms of payment, and you get very much of what a child would get in a traditional private pre-K program for a lot less of cost. So again, I think that we need to look at alternatives. If somebody wants me to say, oh yes, statewide, mandate it, fund it, with no conversation about quality, no.
Well, the people who suggest, Hillary included, and the governor included, that they want to do this would say, well, it's given in parentheses, it's going to be quality. Well, and the very idea that they want to put this in and get kids, sharp at, what is it, 3, 4 years of age?
I think 3 and 4.
3 and 4 on the taxpayer dole will make them better students, and so I guess that's osmosis quality. I don't.
But there's a lot of people who will tell us that we have excellent schools in Rhode Island, and they'll say that the product we're offering is quality.
Who says that?
And have you been to a back-to-school night? Have you listened during campaign seasons and at certain moments and to talking points when it's convenient?
The data belies all of that. Nobody can get away with that anymore. Who would try to get away with that?
Well, I certainly hear
Well,
it.
you know, now that I think about
I
it,
hear it
maybe-
all the time,
Well,
Dan.
yeah, the criticism I had for some of the higher performing inside Rhode Island school systems who championed how they did in the RICAS testing versus their neighbors, versus the comparable town in Massachusetts where they got their tails kicked in. Maybe those people are talking about the quality that they're returning for the taxpayer. Look, I'm not going to be a hypocrite.
No, I'm going to take issue with you. I absolutely have conversations with parents who I admire and respect, who believe that their children are in excellent schools and they are in districts where there is no data to support that.
What do you say to those people?
You know, we gently talk about what it is that they really like and value, and it's very often it's the teachers and the care that they show for their child or for their family. They feel that their children are safe when they go to school, which I think is it's the number one priority for any parent, and I think it's very left out of the conversation a lot, that many of us take for granted that kids are safe in school, and not all kids are safe in school. And then we sometimes have conversations about, you know, different ways of measuring, or maybe I'll raise the issue of growth.
Okay, I get it.
So, you know, do you really want to know?
I get it. I get it. I know. I just figured
It's
out.
a community thing. You
I
feel
just
connected to your school.
I just figured out who you're talking to. You're talking to PTO moms. That's who you're talking to.
No,
When my
no.
daughter was in public school and I was active with the PTO, it was I've talked about this on the radio so many times. There is a protective mom, proud of our school, bake sale, volunteer, relationship with teacher constituency out there who is very well-meaning and in their tunnel vision very focused on the priorities that they have, which is the custodial care of their children. Because as moms, they feel an unspoken lack of security in sending their kids to school 7-8 hours a day, 182 days a year, and so they want to make sure that the relationship and the public relations that they are doing for the teacher who is the custodian of their child is affirmative. That's who you're speaking to. I've seen them all over the place, and they do not know how to call, using the old, I'm not going to use the old phrase, but they don't know how to call it as it should be seen.
Okay, I'm going to push back on the caricature of the PTO mom.
Hey, you started this.
And I'm admittedly not a PTO mom. My strengths don't really lie in much of what the PTO asks for, but
I'm not saying PTOs are bad places. I'm just saying I've
know.
seen the culture.
But all I'm going to say is I think there are some, I think what you described absolutely exists. I actually kind of feel like I live it every day. But I also think that there are, you know, moms there who are able to hold two ideas in their head at one time, which is what I would say too. Like, there are things about a school that can be wonderful at the same time that there is just not evidence that children are learning as the way that they need to be learning, that the math and reading for me, number one, literacy to me is the number one priority. We do not have evidence that we are teaching our children to read the way that they need to know how to read. You want to talk about a school to prison pipeline? It's elementary school reading.
Okay. Kind of riffing here. When we come back, we will talk about, by the way, educator, teacher, elected school committee member, not now. Now she writes, and she's getting into some hot water. We'll talk about it next. So, Good School Hunting is the blog authored by our guest. You and I could talk about this over coffee for 2 hours. I shouldn't say, most of our audience has not read your blog. We need to change that. That's why I bring you on, because your thinking is something that's really, really important for everybody. But tell the short story on what happened here. I got you all jammed up and fired from Forbes.
No, that's an exaggeration. I wasn't fired. I was a contributor.
Are they taking your work anymore?
No.
They fired you.
Well, it is. I mean, I enjoy saying it like that. I just feel like it makes me sound more important than I was there.
Yeah.
Like I was able to contribute.
You're a contributor, and
I was able to
after
contribute.
you throw 10 pieces at them, they throw you $50. I get it.
No, I actually did. I didn't make any money from them. I hadn't written enough for them to make anything.
You
but
were
the
no
point
longer
is,
availed
Correct.
a self-starting platform on the Forbes blog.
Correct.
Yes.
The piece was inflammatory, would upset the readers. It was incoherent, hard to follow, and all over the place.
And they fired you.
Okay, fine.
Yes. So, what?
It's fine. No, it's really actually
I got
fine.
Anita that's over my shoulder.
I was a little bit
They
of a,
fired you.
Listen, I was a square peg in a round hole to begin with. It was already like a little iffy.
I don't know why they fired you. I thought your piece was actually, I didn't think it was as rambling. It was, you got to read both. So
Yes,
go
you have to
to
read
the
both.
blog, read Erika's piece, and on the front line, you click on the thing, what is that called, the link, and you read the piece that you wrote about.
Yeah.
Long story short, this is worldwide,
Not worldwide. He's the Teacher of the Year in Minnesota a few years ago, yes.
Worldwide, whatever. You got fired, he's worldwide.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, this teacher in Minnesota, Teacher of the Year, writes this blog about white boys in his classroom. And he expresses his frustration over what he sees to be an elitist disposition on their part. And it bothers him. And he wrote about it. What else did he say that really bothered you about what he said?
Okay, so just one thing. He did not write this anonymously. He wrote this under his name about his current students.
Correct.
And there was nothing in the piece that spoke that it was only a few or some. It was a general statement about his students, and it was actually a general statement about white boys in general and white males in general. And I had a major problem with that for a couple reasons. One is I saw it, and we can debate it, and I have debated, I saw that as a teacher publicly shaming their current students. I did not see it as somebody talking about their experience in the past or over the years. It was the students in his classroom today, literally. My other problem with it is that so many people, including him, have worked hard to move away from labeling people and disparaging people and shaming people based on their immutable characteristics.
Meaning things you can't do nothing about. You're born white, you're born black, that's all you get. You're born a girl, you're born a boy.
We have an ugly history of doing that. We did it about Native Americans and African Americans, and black boys have faced this for a very long time. And so the idea that the right shift is to move away from doing something that was wrong and is wrong, because it still happens, and to instead move to where we now do it about a different set of people born as males with white skin, it's just unacceptable to me. I don't think that it moves the conversation forward
I agree.
at all.
Well, let me check a couple boxes in terms of agreement. He sold his kids out. There's a violation there that I think is horrifying. Secondly, I agree that this is kind of a repackaging of the same old behavior. So I agree with you. What did you, though, really want to say about what he said about it? Given that those two things, he sees something about the 8th grade white boy in his classroom that really bothers the heck out of him. What did you see that he saw?
You mean what did he say that
Yes.
bothered me? So a few things really.
What did he say that what was it? What was I've read his piece twice. What I couldn't figure out. And again, this is kind of tough for you, but you really good school hunting. Go read these things because this is really important.
Dan promises it'll be on the Facebook page.
Of course,
It'll be on
we
Twitter.
will link it. It's on Fox.
He'll hand deliver it to your house.
FoxProvince.com.
Hard copy.
I'll do that as long as you agree that you got fired by Forbes. But what he was saying was hard to figure out. Was it their presence? Was it their attitude? Was their behavior? Was their treatment of other students? I couldn't really get it. Could you get it?
Well, so here's part of the thing.
It was almost their presence that was bothering
I
him.
didn't find there to be a shred of evidence or examples, really, of what he was describing. But I'll tell you 3 things that still stick with me. And this piece was published on Friday, so I've read it quite a few times. One thing that bothered me, and there was one line, and it rankled a lot of people, and it's funny because some people thought it was like funny and a joke, and other people thought it was sort of terrible, and this is kind of where we are today, right? It said, I'm trying, I am, you know the saying, you can lead a white male to anti-racism, but you can't make him think. I just find that offensive. Now, if it was an anonymous author and he's talking about, I probably wouldn't like the piece, but the context would be different for me. The reason that
because you assert that you're seeing the students, you're seeing the vision of his students in the classroom,
and I'm imagining
and
somebody.
he's thinking he can't talk to them or reason with them on issues of race.
So that was issue number one. The second thing that bothered me a lot was the claim that the disengagement of the white male students in his classroom is not the result of systemic oppression, as it is for many students. It is a result of their entitlement, that because they are so entitled, they disengage.
What about his own teaching?
I've never seen him teach.
Who
I have
knows?
no idea.
Teacher of the year. Teacher of the year couldn't be his own teaching.
But to
So.
say a comment, I mean, part of it bothered me too. I have taught hundreds of white boys and black boys and brown boys, okay? I could list for you, and I gladly will another day, a myriad of reasons of why I have seen children disengaged. One reason, for a small percentage, is that they're entitled jerks. Or maybe they're just 8th grade boys, whatever. You know, you can lay it on the kid. But I mean, I taught boys whose parents were deployed because of military families in San Diego, children with severe mental health issues, kids who'd been removed from the home because of domestic violence. I mean, I could give you
no matter what race or ethnicity is
Yes.
involved. Yes.
So the idea that the disengagement of a child who, and an 8th grader is a child, that is attributable to their entitlement and not to something. I mean, they could be having suicidal ideations, or be mentally, ill, or have a mother who's sick with cancer, but they're too entitled to engage in class. I just can't. I just
So
can't
you
accept it.
you wrote about it. By the way, can I just say, I was an 8th grade boy once.
And this guy would not have liked you, Dan.
I have mentored 8th grade boys for years in volunteer work. They are brutal.
I live with one.
Brutal.
I'm raising one. Yes, it's joyful and awful and frustrating and amazing, and the blessings are so huge, and you want to
But
swear
when
at them.
But when you reach them, it is really rewarding. And here's what happens. They may not like you when they're 14,
Of course not.
but when they're 19 and 20 and 21, they can't wait to tell you how much they enjoyed being with you when they were 14. That I have experienced firsthand over a decade's worth of volunteer work. So
Can I make one more quick point?
that teacher should know that. And that he doesn't know that is a problem.
No, here's the thing. I suspect that the piece fell flat for a lot of people, and he's surprised. And I think that he has, I can say for sure, he has reflected on it. I have seen it. It has not been, he has nothing really kind to say about me, but he has reflected.
Because you called him out.
He has reflected, and he, and both of us take a risk when we write this kind of piece, and both of us have haters that have said hideous things to us over the past week. That's part of the gig. Don't write the piece if you don't want that, right?
Oh, you mean having an opinion and being a provocateur is sometimes tough terrain?
And I'd like to say something, and actually one other thing too.
Wouldn't know about that.
If the goal is to persuade people, you've already got your people, right? So if the goal is to get another person, like a Dan York, to actually think and rethink and reflect and perhaps change his heart or his mind in some way, right? Then it's worth it. I don't think that what he wrote is going to do that. I think it's going to resonate really well with the people who already think like that.
So again, I recognize that many of you haven't, all of you, 99% of you haven't read the piece. Well, maybe you've got penetration in the market. 90% of you haven't read the piece. Read the piece, and I'll have Erika on the radio show in a week or two, and we'll talk about it. By the way, it seems to me that teachers ought to be teaching regular stuff too, and not necessarily opining on the elitist and racial cosmetics of their classrooms. How about just teaching them? We'll check in on another matter when we come back. So listen, you're very about parent engagement, and you and I have talked about the idea because right now, as a citizen, you're like a, I don't know, an uber hyper ultra parent, you're a former teacher, you're a former school committee member, you're nationally recognized, except for Forbes where you got fired, in a blog, Good School Hunting, that you should read, that you write.
Yeah.
But we agree that there aren't enough capable parents at the table educationally across the state to make change.
Well, wait a sec. First, I'm going to say,
Don't
I
we?
actually
Don't
think.
we agree on that?
Wait, no. You're making assumptions about me as a parent. If you ask my kids' schools, I'm not like a super parent. I don't even chaperone field trips. You know, I don't even get my background check done.
I'm
to do
talking
it.
about your thinking on policy.
But in terms of engagement, yes.
Your policy thinking.
Yes. And before I say there aren't enough parents, because I think there are enough parents, I think there are enough parents.
They haven't either.
I dispute what you said.
They don't get the access or
Thank
haven't
you.
been asked to access access.
Yes. A few years ago,
Not enough integration.
a few years ago, our Senator Sheldon Whitehouse convened an education summit for stakeholders. And Dan McGowan, who I adore, he tweeted out a photo.
WPRI.com.
He tweeted out a photo, and he commented on how
No parents.
his comment actually was how white the room was.
Okay.
But I reached out and asked who was on that invite list to Sheldon Whitehouse's office twice. They did not respond. Not a single person in that room was just a parent. They might have been a union leader who has kids.
Got it.
You know, so
there's
this is an ongoing problem where parents are not given a seat at the table in any serious way.
So this new group, Prov Parents and PLEE, which is kind of an equity parent group.
I think it's Parents Leading for Educational Equity,
Yes.
I think.
I only have a minute since you filibustered there. Do you support their work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
What
I
do
don't.
you think their goal should be?
That's not for me to say. I'm not part of the group. What I've seen about parents deserving a seat at the table, yes. What I've seen about them saying that parents of color are less likely to be invited to the table, yes. So I agree on those two fundamental points. In terms of what the platform, what the issue should be, I don't really think I know. I mean, what would mine be? Literacy and reading instruction in the early grades.
And then there's this big discipline thing that we're working on that we're out of time to discuss.
I'm sorry.
Restorative justice.
That's actually honestly too complex of a topic for like a one sentence, because when it's done well, it's great, and when it's not done well, it's a disaster.
And when it's implemented and the teachers don't know what it is.
That falls in the disaster category.
Yes. All right. Keep writing.
Thanks.
Do you want me to call Forbes? for you?
No, but thank you for the offer. How many times?
Anita,
4 times? He's
give-
having so much fun with it, isn't he?
Forbes number on the phone. What is it? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to remind you, Good School Hunting. Read the blog, click on the blog that we're referring to, and then make your own judgment as to who had the right perspective. And we'll talk about it with Erika on the radio in a week or two, okay? Been a busy week in the General Assembly and the White House and Congress. So the beat goes on. Charlie Lombardi, North Providence Mayor, is our guest Monday night. And we'll talk to you Monday afternoon on the radio at 3 until 6 on WPRO. Thank you. Good night.